In this video, we're going to go through solving quadratic equations. Now, to solve quadratic equations, there's two ways that we generally use. The first way that we're going to look at is factorizing. If you have equations in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, you normally use factorizing. I'm not going to say you always use factorizing, but generally you will. So, first step to do, you factorize any common multiples you have. So for example, if it's 2x squared minus 4x plus 6 or something, you would actually factorize out the 2 first. Like so, before you do any solving. Then the second step is you substitute any variables if you need. Now we'll come back to that one in a little bit. Then once you've done that, factorize the quadratic. So this one, for example, we can factorize that using the cross method. Now you don't have to use the cross method, as I mentioned before. If you have other ways you want to do it, feel free to do it, but cross method is generally the quickest way. And then 3, apply the null factor law, then you solve for x, and then you resubstitute if you need to. Now, you will need to know what the null factor law is first. The null factor law suggests that if you have two numbers multiplying, give you 0, this part, then either a is 0 or b is 0. So one of them will be a 0 because you have to multiply 0 to get you a 0. If you have this in polynomial form, that means one of these brackets has to equate to a 0. So for example, if the first one's equal to 0, then we have x minus alpha must be equal to 0. Or it could be the second one here, which would then mean x minus beta is equal to 0, etc., etc. So that means you'll have multiple solutions, and you have to write out all your solutions. So for example, here you have x minus 1 multiplied by 2x plus 3, and it's equal to 0. You would say either x minus 1 is equal to 0, or 2x plus 3 is equal to 0. Once you've gone to that stage, you then just simply rearrange to find your solutions. Alright, let's do an example here. 5x squared minus 18x minus 8 gives you a 0. If we use our cross method and we check the numbers, we have 5x and x, that's the only combination you have for 5. And then for 8, you'll be using negative 4 and 2. That way it gives you 20. Because of that, if we factorize it out and write it out, we have 5x plus 2 and x minus 4 equals 0. So then, because one of these brackets are going to be equal to 0, you have 5x plus 2 is equal to 0, or x minus 4 is equal to 0, and you solve it. So then x gives you negative 2 over 5, or x is equal to 4. Now, this is an example of a substitution. The way you can tell is you have things here, you have expressions here where they're the same, and this is in a squared term, whereas the other one isn't. So if we do a simple substitution, what then happens is you'll get a simple quadratic expression, and then we can solve this a little bit easier from there. So let's say y is equal to x minus 3. The first part, we have x minus 3 with a squared. So then we get y squared. Second part is plus 2y, because we're replacing x minus 3 with y, giving us a 0. This then becomes a simple quadratic expression where we can go through and work it out, like so. When you use some factorizing, you should be able to work it out really quickly. Then after we've done that, we substitute the original back in, which is x minus 3, in place of the y. We simplify it down, we have x minus 4, giving us a 0. So either that one's 0, or that one's 0 by the null factor law. Thus, x is equal to 0, or x is equal to 4. Now, this is another example of a substitution. because if we substitute x squared, this then becomes a quadratic expression. So let y equals to x squared. We then have 4y squared minus 35y minus 9 equals to 0. Because 36 minus 1 gives you 35, we would have 4y multiplied with 9. And because the middle numbers are negative, we use negative 9. And the rest of the brackets are 1s. If you're not sure, you can use the cross method to work it all out. Once you've done that, you resubstitute it back in. So 4x squared plus 1. Then we have x squared minus 9 equals to 0. Go through and write it out. 4x squared plus 1 equals to 0, or x squared minus 9 equals to 0. Now you might notice that when you rearrange the first one, you get negative a quarter. That actually has no solutions. This has no solutions because you cannot square root a negative, so no solutions for that part. So then let's go to x squared minus 9. Now, this is where the balancing method kind of comes in. We'll do a full explanation of that in a moment, but minus 3 times minus 3 and 3 times 3 both give you a 9. Thus, x actually has two solutions when it's when you're square rooting 9. You actually have a plus and a minus part because of what I've written there. So x must be equal to plus or minus 3. This then brings us to the balancing method, where if you have a look here, you rearrange the equation when it has one squared expression and then another. You rearrange the equation so that you have c equals to the rest. So the last one there, and c has to be greater than 0. As I mentioned just then, you can't square root a negative. Then you take the square root of both sides and make sure you add a plus or minus sign. If you don't add the plus or minus sign, you don't have all the solutions as I mentioned just before. Then you just simply rearrange and find x. Alright, let's see how this works. So, solve 2x squared plus 3 all squared minus 25 equals to 0. You firstly move the number to the other side, so then we get a 25. There's a squared on the left hand side, so we square root it. Now remember, before you do any of this stuff, move all the numbers across to the other side first before you do the square root, otherwise it doesn't work. As I said before, you have both a positive and a negative solution, so don't forget to put the plus or minus in. Plus or minus square root of 25 is plus or minus 5. We'll left the 2x plus 3 on the side. We move the 3 over, so then you get negative 3 plus or minus 5. Now I'm going to make this a little bit simpler first before I divide it by 2, because it will look nicer. So minus 3 plus 5 gives us a 2, and then minus 3 minus 5 gives us a negative 8. So then we divide both sides by 2, which will then give us 1 and negative 4. And the last type of question you'll see is writing out original equations. So if x equals to 2 and x minus 2 are solutions, find the original quadratic. Now, if you go through the step before, you would have x minus 2 equals to 0 for x equals to 2, and x plus 2 equals to 0 for x equals to negative 2. If you then go backwards on that logic, we have to have it in x minus 2 times x plus 2. That must have been where we got the solutions from. However, you need to keep in mind that any number multiplied in the front, because we're making it equal to 0 here, find the solutions, will be divided. So we have to put this number in to show you that that number may or may not possibly have been there. Now this number can be any number, so we'll write a element so that a is part of any real number, because it can be any number you can think of.